Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to leg 8 of the podcast relay. Chris here again, just being joined by Liam Scully, Liam, CEO of Lincoln City Football Club. So good to see you, Liam, and welcome to leg 8. Delighted to have you here. Thank you very much for taking time on a Friday afternoon to join us. For everyone just sort of getting in, you'll know that we're into now leg 8 of If I Knew Then What I Know Now. I've got kind of previous folks up here on the screen behind this week. I thought I'd sort of trail it a little bit as well. And, you know, we're taking the time during this period where we've all had a bit more time to reflect and do things differently, to take the theme of If I Knew Then What I Know Now as an opportunity to have some discussions with some people who have had their own careers of success to date. They're still going through those, but they're applying the reflection in a way that allows them to keep getting ever better. And so having had the chance to speak with Sean West last week in the Lincoln area, he's kept the Lincoln theme going, and delighted that we get into a slightly different bit of the sporting world that we started with, and getting into kind of the leadership and the business of sports. So Liam, really delighted that we get to sort of see a slightly different position from a sport perspective. We keep our performance theme that's so important to us at Planet K2 going in terms of business and sport. So a really nice overlap there as well. So great to be here. And how's lockdown been for you, kind of, I guess, personally and professionally, you know, in order to kind of kick us off?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. Clearly, very, very difficult times for the country and for everybody involved. And I think as an organisation that, you know, we pride ourselves on being a pillar of the community. I think we've also had the added pressure of acting and having responsibilities to the fans and the wider community of Lincoln. So, you know, every message that's gone out from the club, every action that we've taken, we've felt the weight and the pressure of making sure that we do, you know, that we are good citizens and that we do our communities proud. I think home life's been interesting. So 2 young boys, you know, getting stormed on the Zoom calls, and I thought I'd come into the office today for safety to ensure that we had no repeats of that. So that's been fun. I think the missus somehow have avoided getting sent to the shed after 12 weeks with living right under her shoes. So I've done well there. But yeah, no, it's been interesting. It's been difficult times, but ultimately, you know, as a as a leader of an organisation, the challenges that have come thick and fast. I'm fortunate to have been surrounded by a really good executive team, and between us, we've kind of rolled our sleeves up, got on with things, and kind of the fruits of our labour and the things that we've sown in previous years. I think now is the time that we're starting to reap some of the benefits of that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's just a really interesting mix talking to everyone over the last few weeks about how leveling this whole thing has been, because everyone ends up as the person rather than the title. So it's the stories about the home life and the kind of, everything kind of merging into one, which are really interesting, whilst still needing to carry on and kind of deliver the performance side as well. So I am potentially expecting an interruption from a 7-year-old, but I'm not. I think we've negotiated our way out of that one happening. So it'll be down to me today if it does happen. So I think that's really interesting concept about the kind of being good citizens as well, and we'll kind of roll into a whole bunch of stuff around maybe some of that as we get the conversation going. But I'm just curious, before we get into if you knew then what you know now, I'm just interested in a little bit of the journey to CEO of a football club, Lincoln specifically. What's your story been that's got you into this position, and how's your leadership sort of journey shaped?
Yeah, so like most kind of young men who are interested in football, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a footballer. I was part of the schoolboy system, and I was a goalkeeper that just never really grew. So I got my kind of marching orders prior to kind of scholarship year, and it was probably at that point my whole world was rocked. My confidence, and at that time I thought I was going to be a professional footballer. That's where my focus was kind of set for. And then what happened? I was very fortunate that I got one of the first apprenticeships in football in the non-playing side. As part of a national scheme. So I think there were 10 places nationally. I applied for one of those. I was lucky to get it, and then I got placed in my local club that was taking that position on, and that was at Doncaster Rovers. And the story from there, Chris, to be honest with you, is I've done a range of roles right across the football club and the sporting industry. I've had a number of short sabbaticals away from the industry, but predominantly 16 years of working in football in total, and just done many different jobs, and find myself very fortunate to find myself at Lincoln City, working for some outstanding people, and being given the task of taking the football club when we came back into the Football League, taking it forward as to a club that once again can thrive. So very, very lucky to be in the seat I'm in, very privileged and honoured. But my journey's been a vocational one, and unfortunately that's given me the experience of many touch points and many experiences from within football at ground level.
Yeah. Okay. I was a coaching session this week with someone. I was talking. I used the concept of a goalkeeper mindset to help get their head around a particular strategy. We might get back to some of that to see, does the goalkeeper mindset present itself in particular ways in your leadership? So I am interested. Is there anything that, if you'd known then when you were being released at 16, that you know now that would have been helpful for you back then?
Yeah, I think what I was fortunate enough is that I had good parents and good grounding. That when it was I felt it was catastrophic at the time. My whole world had kind of just collapsed. Really didn't see it coming, and that was my own ignorance and my own naivety. And I think what I was very fortunate is that I had parents that knew the right amount of putting the arm around me and giving me a cuddle and make me feel it's all right, but equally motivated me, didn't let me kind of just feel sorry for myself, and quite quickly got me back on the bicycle and said that there are alternative routes. And I think I was very much, for probably 6 months after that, I was almost trying to fight my parents for that. I was still going, I will be a professional footballer. It doesn't matter that I'm a goalkeeper and I'm just 5'9.5". I'll show them. And it was a bit of a dose of realism, but equally done so in a way that was empathetic, and I just felt that love and support that natural you get from your parents. So I was really fortunate. I was brought up by a mother that's child psychologist, so constantly under the microscope, and fair play, you know, I'm sure I reap the benefits of her training and her education. But I think really the fact that, you know, life will give you many setbacks. You know, success isn't a straight line. And I think that was a nice early lesson that kind of shaped me for the future. And, you know, get back on the bike, dust yourself down, and crack on.
Yeah, yeah. So for years, sort of in high performance sport, one of the things has always been, you know, if you want to be great, choose your parents wisely, because the genetic influence is very strong. So at least you didn't give them a hard time for not getting you to over 6 foot. So that's kind of, you know, kind of good from that perspective. But yeah, I think that balance and that nurturing that comes alongside that as well. And, you know, I get. Do you see that ability to sort of be cared for, but be sort of, you know, given the tough love, has that kind of influenced in your leadership style?
Yeah, and I think that the one thing that I would like to see that we nurture into the next generation and our workforce is that resilience. You know, we're in an era now where we are very supportive. You know, the school of hard knocks is no longer around, in a sense. You know, for example, apprentices in football, they're no longer cleaning the stands, you know, cleaning the boots. You know, there isn't, you know, this kind of mentality that probably did encourage, you know, bullying and some really poor practices. However, you know, what that does lose is you know, the potential of that resilience factor. And what I think is important is that we replace that in other ways. And I think that's where I was very fortunate with my parents, and equally my network around me. Equal to my parents was my friendship circle, in the fact that, you know, between, you know, that group that I felt were very close, they gave me, you know, a bit of a kick in, as lads would do, and, you know, tell me that I'm not good enough and stop moping and stop crying, but then we, you know, we crack on, and we you know, we go again together. So I think that, you know, it's really important that, you know, the one thing that I feel is that has been embedded is just that inner resilience, and the fact that, you know, that motivation, it has to start from within. And of course we rely on our network, and of course we rely on the support that we have around us, but ultimately the inner strength, it does have to come from yourself, and you've got to have that determination and that drive. And I think what I would always say is the analogy being, you know, the bumper barriers on the bowling alley. You know, the keeper's on track, but ultimately we've still got to be the one that goes and knocks that middle pin out in order to hit the strike. And I think that's how, you know, the support network that I've always felt around me was there, that just a little help and a steer to get back on track. But it is down to you, it is down to the individual.
Yeah, and I guess the importance of knowing the track and where that's going, and everyone kind of having that same picture of where you're heading as well. And interestingly, you talk about the resilience, because certainly I think in a lot of the work that we do, we always, you know, if someone says we'd like a resilience program, we also say, okay, so, you know, we want to make sure you've got your mental health awareness program alongside that, so you've got both sides of the equation. Those barriers are kind of being there as well, and often the resilience actually to keep going when things are going well is as valuable as the resilience needed to kind of bounce back from stuff as well. So I think it's a really interesting commodity when we open it up to being something that is just a really useful set of thoughts, principles, you know, responses to whatever's going on. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's a key area, and a good one to call out. So if I knew then what I know now, kind of, you know, that's the topic. And so you and I chatted a little bit earlier in the week, and I'm just wondering, you know, having had that chat, things kind of settled with you a little bit more as well. Does your mind go to a particular place when you think about, okay, well, if I knew then what I know now, okay, so what? Does it go anywhere in particular to start reflecting?
Yeah, I think the first thing for me really was when, you know, I was by default, I got my first, you know, senior management position at the age of 24, 25. And that genuinely was by accident. I'd just, you know, received a promotion to a role where I was the deputy in an organisation, and my line manager and the chief executive of the organisation went off with kind of sick leave, and we was left holding the baby. And at the time, the organisation uncovered some quite difficult circumstances, and ultimately it was a baptism of fire. You know, I would never have been given that opportunity at 24, 25 without those set of circumstances. But ultimately, you know, it was left with me, and it was at a point that, you know, it was time to kind of step up. And I think the big thing that I'll take, and will always take forward in my career, was, you know, we were at the stage of the organisation I was leading at the time, we were talking about innovation, and we were talking about how do we change the dial here? What do we need to do to innovate, to stay relative, to stay, to make sure we have a place, in the market.
Yeah.
And when everyone talks about innovation, they talk about, or if we're talking right nowadays, we talk about Elon Musk and Tesla and sending a man to, to the space station. Well, my favorite piece of innovation is the upside down ketchup bottle. The lid used to be on the top, and all of a sudden, we just changed the pouring point, and the lid's on the bottom. Well, actually, the lid's in the same place. We just changed the label. And it's a brilliant piece of innovation because it's so simple, it's so basic, but it's a game changer. It really is. And I think the one thing I found is that before you earn the right to be innovative in terms of new concepts and bringing things, the brilliant basics have to be mastered and have to be in place. There is no point aiming for that sweet spot of innovation if the grounding isn't in place. And my first leadership role, I kind of came into it and I was like, right, we're going to rip everything up, we're going to change everything, we're going to make the and actually the focus could have and would have been far more effective in just detailing and getting the bread and butter sorted and then moving on. So I think the one thing that I've been really conscious as I've moved around different senior leadership roles is brilliant basics, get the basics in place, build from there, and earn the right to be truly innovative, but deal with the bread and butter first and foremost.
And was that, how did the confidence feel being thrown into the fire at that time? So that feels like at 24, here you go, circumstances mean you're now in that sort of chief exec role. How did you feel from a confidence point of view?
I think it was really difficult for a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, obviously, your natural maturity levels anyway, mixed with your limited knowledge. So you've got, a minus on your maturity, a minus on your knowledge base. So you're really up against it. But what that does do is it sharpens the mind. There's nothing like a crisis that focuses your attention. So I think from that point of view, it was a really steep learning curve. But every single day I went in and I was learning something new, and every single it was fundamental. I think the real challenge is, in any leadership role, or if you're part of a team and then you become a supervisor, stepping out of the team environment and becoming the leader, I think that's a natural challenge. And I think that I've always believed that the first leadership step you ever take is the hardest. Not necessarily because of the skill set and the knowledge, more because you're going from team environment and team, person within a team to the person maybe on the outside or on the peripheral of that team, and that can be a real difficult balance. To then add the social aspect in it, I was good friends with the people, so I was going out for a few beers at the weekend with the lads and having a curry and a few pints and getting into all kinds of states, what you do at that age. Yeah. And then Monday morning, I'm expected to be the boss and the bulletproof and the confidence and the profession. And it was really difficult to kind of manage the social aspect and then equally the professionals. So I think one thing I've been very conscious of is there's various different arguments for different styles around how where the ideal amount of distance from that core team, and I've always taken the approach, probably because I've stepped up and stepped from within, that I'd rather be too close than too distant. I accept that there are failings of that model, but what they are is that they're always going to be genuine and honest and transparent failings, rather than just trying to hide behind an office door or hide behind decisions. I think always being able to front up and be accountable to those decisions. I think that the challenge of that, and the flip side, is that I think the shop floor is a unique space, and leaders I don't think should obsess around being on the shop floor too much and obsessed with knowing every detail. Without being too crude, I'd almost say the shop floor is like a teenager's bedroom. There's some things mums should just not know, and they're better off not knowing. And I'd almost say there's synergies in the fact that you've got to at least, you've got to have checks and balances, and you've got to be able to relate and understand what's going on. But you can stifle creativity, you can stifle people's confidence by trying to be a member of the team, by constantly being in and on the shop floor. You've got to employ people, trusting them to do a good job, and give them the creative space to get on with things.
Yeah, Yeah, quite a lot of interesting stuff there as well in terms of the collaboration. Because I guess ultimately, well, hopefully, teenagers end up keeping their bedroom in a state that they're happy to show it off as well. So I'm still hoping for that at home. But I got there eventually though, so I am hopeful of that. And I'm just interested in that balance and the proximity piece, Liam, because that's quite an interesting challenge, but around where we get our confidence from. So some people definitely get confidence from the proximity and the quick feedback and the feeling part of something, and other people get their proximity a little bit more from the distance and sort of having their own space and kind of making sense of stuff for themselves. Was that part of the balance for you, just in terms of getting that right and the relationship with confidence and other people and proximity to them?
Yeah, so in my early days, I really obsessed over my brand. So
Right.
I really obsessed with what do the team know me as. So if the team was to be asked, what is Liam? How what is he as a leader? What does he? I was obsessive as to what that would be, and I wanted it to be 100% positive. And I think what I've quickly learned is that that utopia doesn't necessarily exist. What your brand and what you want it to be. Ultimately, what you've got to do as an effective leader is you've got to be many things to many people. Not everything to everyone, but you've got to show different sides, because as per if we're using sport as the example, as per a performance team, that maybe every character needs a different style of management. It's very, very similar in managing and leading a business and an organization. And I think what I did find is that no matter what I wanted my brand to be, I had a default setting. Right. That when I stopped thinking about it, I would ultimately go into that mode, and that was actually more me and what was true to me. So over probably a course of 5-6 years, I realized that if I'm just myself, and if I'm honest, and as long as I'm holding myself to high professional standards, then the brand and the identity will take care of itself. There will be some things that I think hit the sweet spot and I'm really pleased about, and there'll just have to be some things that I accept that I'll never be that. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to compromise my really good qualities by trying to compensate for the ones that maybe are not ideal for this perfect leader. So I'd just rather be really good in the areas that I'm really good at, and not necessarily accept failings, but just not try and be something that I'm not.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting conversation I have with a lot of leaders actually around. Are you clearly and proudly stating to the people that you're leading the kind of leader that you know yourself to be, and how you thrive and how you're seeking to add value, so that people can kind of get ready to consume that? But that also puts you in a position to kind of say, but there will be occasions where we perhaps have to kind of, just change some of that, because circumstances will require us and me to be a little bit different in terms of how we tackle stuff. And I think the confidence to articulate, this is the kind of leader that I am. I think that there's a real maturity and growth in that, and being comfortable that you don't have to be all things to all people. You're better off having a stand that you can then move from together. Has that changed in different roles that you've been in, different kind of chief exec roles, different organizations for you?
Yeah, so going back to that very first role, that was an interesting one, because that was about an organisation that it was the July I got, I got the job, and we were expecting to close the doors by the January. So it was effectively, can you save it, or it's going to be wound down and it's going to go bust. And what ended up happening out of that was the senior leadership group that we had and that we retained, we developed a bond. And we were really close. And then once we earned the right to survive, and once we went on to other things, and the organisation got back to thriving and it went on to bigger and better things, there was a real bond within that group that couldn't really, was never really split. So as more people joined the organisation, as the leadership structure changed, that original kind of cohort of 5, we remained kind of uniquely tight. And what was really interesting is, I think if you asked us all, we weren't necessarily the type of people that would go for a beer with each other or socialise with each other. We came from very different backgrounds. But what we'd earned through going through that experience is we had a bond that meant we could be very honest, but without agenda to each other. And what we was able to do was able to give feedback to each other that was without agenda, and it never felt that it was loaded. So I think what was unique about that is that there was almost the group led and drove the organisation on, and that unity and that bond was never broken until then. Everybody started kind of moving on to different career paths. Mm-hmm. My next job that I went into, the thing that I really struggled with was 14 months down the line. I was going, but why has the senior leadership team not got this bond? Why are we not, why would we not run through a brick wall for each other? And ultimately, what I then obviously learned going through the various stages was that the experience that we had in fighting for survival, you can't replicate that. You can't manufacture that. Yeah. And ultimately, the output and the outcome of that experience created something that was then very powerful. So then trying to replicate that when building, high performing teams in the future, you do need a unique experience, or you do need something to dial that up, and it can be lots of little things. It can be various different things, but I quickly learned that I can't just have a method and then just apply the same method. It's horses for courses. It's got to be the right methodology for the right time for the right organisation. Surviving is a different mode and being till thriving. Completely different leadership skills and examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, thank you for your comment around kind of leaders not pretending to be what they're not, because that's clear in there. But also, as you've just said, Liam, as well, I think that's really important to have that sense of I'm going to be clear the kind of leader that I am, but I'm going to be clear what the situation is that we're in, and we'll make sure that we're all together kind of facing into that. But it just strikes me that it was really lucky that your first role was one that played to the goalkeeper mindset beautifully. Got to keep stuff out. There's going to be shots being fired. We're going to, really enjoying the opportunity to kind of see if you can keep a clean sheet when actually, there's not much defence and there's a lot of attack. And that probably would have been quite useful for you at that point.
Yeah, and the thing is, looking back now, and when you talk about reflecting, and if I knew then what I know now, my industry knowledge was 1%. It really was. I had no idea, and I was completely out of my depth. Frankly, I was in the hot seat because I was the cheap option. That's why I was. That's why I was there. And ultimately, what the learning curve that went from that was my knowledge base quite quickly ratcheted up from 1%. Every day I was doubling. I was leaving the organisation with double the knowledge that I walked through the door in the morning. And whilst that still might only be 5%, or 6%, I was every day I was developing and learning, and every day that the team was learning as well. And I think also what that experience has kind of given me good grounding for the future is walking into the organisation. You don't have to have all the answers to everything at that moment in time. You will learn on the job. You will learn from the environment and the experiences. And equally, when I came to Lincoln City, the mistake I did make in the early phases was I went, Doncaster, where I'd left, I thought we'd built up a really good structure and there was some really good practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift everything from Doncaster and we're going to build it again in Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And Lincoln and Doncaster are very different places, different communities, different expectations. And within about 4 or 5 weeks, I quickly realised that, don't try and replicate. We've got to take the best of best practice that's out there. We are the best of thieves at times, but make it unique and make it special to Lincoln, make it special to the group that I'm responsible for leading, make it unique to the challenge that I've been set by the board of Lincoln City, and make sure I'm meeting those expectations, not that of another club or another organisation. But I just think that the fallacy that you've got all the answers, or that you at any stage, it is just a myth. And I think the quicker that we become comfortable in the fact that we're constantly learning, constantly evaluating, we're not afraid to go, do you know what, that's a bad decision, reverse, let's start again. I think that there's some real power in that humility and that honest and ability to say, do you know what, we're going down the wrong track, start again, and we'll go. And by the way, that's my fault, guys. Sorry, I've wasted your effort. Let's reverse. It's on me. This. I think that's more powerful than ploughing on head first, trying to force an endpoint that's not achievable or not right.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, just around having the confidence to lead rather than feeling that you need to be a leader who has all the answers. And that subtle difference between the two is very important. we'll have to talk about the performance intelligence model that I've got. We'll talk about that sort of beyond today, but that's an interesting one in as much as it's based upon confidence. And the key piece to begin with is, are you confident that you know the world that you're working in as a leader? Do you feel like you know the field of play, as well as are you confident you know yourself as a performer? And once you've got those two bits in place, you've got a stable base to then kind of cut to action from, whether strategic action or personal performance. And it's really interesting, that kind of the world know, that I call it, that confidence that you know the world that you're performing in, your speed of learning that you're talking about there as well. That's particularly interesting. Have you found ways of acquiring that knowledge that you've become more comfortable with? So who do you talk to? What do you read? You know, how do you update that knowledge when you're starting from a new knowledge base, I guess?
I think it's making sure that you stretch yourself, every single day. So quite frankly, this stretches me. Sitting here today talking to you about myself, with people that I'm sure, very well respected leaders within their businesses and their industries, sat listening to this. So I think it's making sure that we every single day just stretch ourselves a little, and don't let that mundane day-to-day task list wear us down. If I'm honest, I'm a Matthew Said junkie. I've read his books. I was introduced to it by the chairman of Lincoln City, and I've become quite obsessed. But I think equally, the other thing that I'm very aware of is that, I'm still a relatively young man in industry. I may lead colleagues with probably double the amount of experience that I've had. And the one thing that you can find is always asking open questions and giving that opportunity for feedback is just absolutely critical, because ultimately, I have to sign off the end decision, and ultimately on my head be it. But the amount of nuggets and the amount of bits of information that come, and the one thing that I've always felt completely fine about is surrounding myself with good people. I don't feel threatened, and I don't think any leader should really feel threatened by surrounded by good people, and arguably people that are far more, got more intelligence, more intellect, better subject knowledge. Because ultimately, taking that collaborative approach and working as a team, having good people around you will only end up in end results. The chief exec or the leader doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room. They're ultimately just the conductor of the orchestra, and the job of the chief exec isn't to have the knowledge. I shouldn't be able to outdo the finance director on finance, or the commercial director on commercial, or the football manager on football. I can't, frankly. But what I can be is I can be the glue that holds the organisation together, and I can ask challenging. I can be the quirky child. I can ask why. What we're doing this for? Just tell me your reasons for that. And through that kind of just check and challenge process with a flexible hierarchy, I think that's the important thing. And flexible hierarchy is something that I really believe in. That when I enter a room, or when any leader enters the room, just because you're chairing the meeting, or just because you sat at the end seat at the table, doesn't mean that that's the knowledge base. And I think any environment, you should be happy, or you should create the environment where there is almost no hierarchy, or at times, if we're talking commercial, the commercial director is the leader of that subject, not the chief exec, not the finance director. Stick in your lane.
Yeah.
know your knowledge base, stick in your lane is critically important.
Yeah, there's interesting sort of leadership models, team models around a holacracy, a holacratic approach, where you get the right people in there, and it's about role and function and collective objective rather than hierarchy. I think that's an interesting area as well, because it takes that idea and sort of tries to operationalize it. It's come a lot from Zappos, the sort of online shoe company in America with Tony Hsieh. There's some interesting stuff that comes out of that as well. And so that surrounding yourself with good people, that kind of being in a position to be the glue. Again, I just keep getting sporting things coming into my head, and seeing you as a goalkeeper, kind of, being quite a mouthy goalkeeper, organising stuff in front of you and quite enjoying that part of it. That may be a complete misinterpretation, but I think there's a skill there in terms of using your voice, because you can see stuff that everyone else can't, and you can see the whole picture, which often is the role of the CEO. And I think that's quite interesting. But But again, your earlier point, and if I knew then what I know now, shifting from crisis reaction into creation and sort of, freedom of performance. What did you learn there, just in terms of, being confident to have those different scenarios and, being able to be effective in those different situations?
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that you're confident, or I felt that my confidence levels in the scenario started from zero every time the challenge was reset. So I would sit there and go, what, I feel like I've nailed this. I understand this. I've got a good knowledge base. I've got a good confidence level. I'm comfortable in this area, and then quite quickly just change the dial a little bit, change the environment, change the expectations, and instantly confidence levels go back to zero. Going back to that inner belief, making sure that you know the pathway that you're in, and whilst there are transferable skills, and whilst often the environment might on the whole remain the same, it's constantly making sure you find those key elements that can change the dynamic, change the experience. So the team here go crazy at me, but I'm obsessive around office moves and environments, and we'll actively move people around, because once we have, we'll set the organization up so the right departments can talk to the right people quite quickly. But when that challenge changes, then we should change that again. We shouldn't, I don't think that, we should have the corner office because we've always been there. We need a dynamic where it might be commercial need to talk to accounts on a day-to-day basis. So, and that's so let's find that environment. So I do drive people crazy by kind of setting up the office and taking it down and resetting it. But, I think the definition of insanity, what we all know the famous quote, but you set something up for a task. Once you've achieved it, then the new task needs different tools. It's a different toolbox. It might, and then it goes back to that, get the right people on the bus, and then worry about where they're sat later. But get good people, get everybody, on the bus, and then we can deal with the seating plan once we're in play.
Yeah. I think I've said this before, but I saw the chief executive of Zalando speaking a while ago, and they very much had a talent approach of, we really like the look of that person. They've got the right kind of character. We're going to get them in and find out where they make a difference, rather than we've got a job and we're going to advertise. So there's an interesting recruitment bit there as well. Moving the office around, teams playing different formations. I think, we can sometimes make the sport metaphor very clunky, but we don't need to. Actually, it's being fit for purpose, and have we got the kind of right formation? So Simon, who's been on the previous podcast, has just put a comment in as well. Surrounding yourself with people who are better than you at the stuff that they need to be better at is really important. But that also plays to the formation bit as well. Sometimes you need someone who's in a particular role leading, don't you? And kind of, have it being the focal point. And does the office move go to that extent as well, where it kind of feels that you're all huddling behind someone else who's kind of at the helm at a different point?
Yeah, and I think that whole group dynamic and that group behaviour has got to come into it. What we've ultimately got to do is we want to create an environment where people feel comfortable that they can thrive. But that ability to thrive has to come from challenge every day. And at times, to be extreme with this, but that can be sitting two people next to each other that don't particularly like each other, but have to work together, or have completely different kind of backgrounds, backstories, aren't natural synergy, because in the uncomfortableness of what that can create, the ingredients that get baked along that journey, the cake that comes out at the other end can be quite special with that. And look, listen, we talked about the sport element, and I do think it's completely crazy, the fact that we have professional sports and athletes that they spend 90% of their week training and developing, and then they spend 10% of that in performance mode, and they're ultimately judged on that 10%. So how hard they work in that 90% is irrelevant, because they're judged at the end of 90 minutes, or at the end of a cricket match, or the rugby match, or whatever, or if they've got a gold medal or not. That's ultimately how they're judged. Whereas kind of administrators, shall we say, or those that don't work in a professional, we're constantly in performance mode. Yeah. But we never spend our time, or we rarely spend time training, developing, questioning our formation, and it's almost, there's got to be a balance between that, because of course we've got to be doers, we've got to achieve outputs in performance mode from an administration point of view, but you have got to spend time training, developing, coaching, because that ultimately affects the performance. And I think that's where, things like the office move, things like, forcing uncomfortable conversations, changing the team up a little bit, changing job descriptions, moving it around. It's not the fact that it's a revolving door. It's just an evolution of the process. And people have to kind of, without sounding arrogant, people to work within the teams that I lead have got to be comfortable with that constant evolution and that moving. We don't set a structure and then just the KPIs change. We work to the key performance indicators. We have a structure in place, and then we just constantly evolve and change that as per the needs of the business, as set by the directors.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, thinking about the different conversations, that can take place, just because we know that, there's an awful lot of focus on diversity and inclusion, but one of the biggest reasons for diversity is that you truly do end up with high performance. Whereas if you only keep allowing the privileged few to keep sort of getting access to certain things, you never actually truly find out what the best performance looks like. You just find out what performance looks like when similar looking people get together who haven't really risen to the top. They've just been helped to the top. And I think there's, the making sure that the diversity that is present is made the most of, and then staying open to more diversity to really pursue how good we can be. That's a really interesting sort of, opportunity with growth for everyone all the time. And I think it's always interesting that, Olympic sports teams don't have a learning and development department, because that's every day. You go to work to do that. There's not a continuous improvement initiative. That's training. So how do you bake that into the environments where you are actually performing every day? It's probably not helpful to have a continuous improvement initiative, but what's the nature of the conversations that we have that can help us keep getting better at doing the stuff whilst doing it? So you kind of bring that mindset. And I think that's really interesting to hear you sort of saying that as well. Is there anything else that you've picked up sort of, as you've sort of stuff that you now know in your role a little while into the role in Lincoln, that, if you knew that then, or you knew it earlier, would have made a difference? Is there anything other stuff comes in?
Yeah, I think it touches on some of the things that we said earlier, but working in the business and on the business are two very different things. And when I first took a leadership role, I was obsessed with working in the business and making a difference by being a brilliant technician and showing everybody that I was a better technician, or I was the person that could design the best spreadsheets, or design the best standard operating procedures, or design the best functionality methods. When actually, your role as a leader is more on the business. And let those in the business and give them that room and that space. And I think if you can retain that bird's eye view and that holistic view of the organisation, I think a leader should have a good idea of what's going on in every area of the business, but not intrinsic. It shouldn't be, root and branch. It shouldn't be detailed, because, you don't want to stifle that creativity. I do, the only thing I would say to contradict that, I think in crisis mode, or in, when you're ambulance chasing, I think there's probably a slightly different approach that you need to take there, for a forensic level of detail. Certainly when it comes to finance and numbers, I think that's a different challenge. But it just goes back to survival mode is very different to thriving. So I think making sure that you get that, you've got credibility to know what's going on in the business, but you are working on the business. You're able to kind of influence, push and pull, almost going back to that kind of, leading the orchestra, making sure that you're just constantly keeping everybody to time. So I think that the challenge with that you have as a leader is, before you know it, you're in too deep, and by the time you realise it, you've involved yourself too much, or you. So I think what you've then got to do is just understand those exit strategies that you're constantly playing. Yeah. You don't feel like you're abandoning the team just because things have got hard, or we've got an impasse on something. So it's just constantly constantly managing that really. And I think the biggest confidence and the biggest game changer for me that I learned was it really doesn't hurt to say, sorry, I got that wrong. You don't have to be bulletproof. You have to be human, and you've got to be honest, because people will see through when you quite basic language. But if you're trying to blag a success, people will know. So you're far better, reversing and using that type of language, that type of approach. You will gain far more credibility than you will trying to plow head on, into something that's not quite right or isn't going to work.
Yeah, no, that's really clear. And again, I like that, some of the contrast there where you say, well, actually, if it's this kind of situation, we need a different approach. But again, that's very much like, okay, what are the various scenarios that we as a leadership team are likely to face over the course of the next 12 months? And what's our game plan for each of those scenarios? Here's a defensive one where we're looking to recover. Here's an offensive one where we're looking to create momentum. Again, in the same way that the teams will set up and kind of go, right, we've just gone a goal down. What do we do for the next few minutes? And you don't want to be in that situation, but at least you've got a game plan for if you find yourself in it, rather than just kind of go, right, let's hope we never get 1-0 down, or we lose a couple of goals. We won't plan for it. We'll just hope that it doesn't happen, because we mustn't have the negative thought about it happening. You get all this madness about not planning for what are just different performance scenarios. And I think having the confidence to also say, as a leader, I'm going to get us ready for these different situations, good, bad, or indifferent, so we're confident to respond. That's very much like that, the confidence to kind of hold your hands up and say, I'm not quite sure here, what do you think? Or I've got that wrong, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? It's planning for the inevitable scenarios, isn't it? I think, and that's important.
Yeah, and the one I've struggled with was at times is when people have said, only think positive thoughts. So, don't review this and say, well, what happens if it goes badly? What if it's not well received? Only positive thoughts will lead to only positive outcomes. Well, if I'm honest, I can understand that from a mentality point of view. I can understand it from an elite performance point of view. But what you have seen in scenarios like that, and look, if we use football as an example, but teams that don't prepare for what happens if they go 1 down after 5 minutes, then usually end up losing 4 or 5-0 because they don't have that alternative approach. And it's almost the same in business and every decision. What happens if we launch a new product and it bombs? What happens if it's just not hit that sweet spot and people don't like it? Well, we've almost got to know before we start that we've got an alternative route, because in the same breath, what we're doing is in the product design and in launch, whatever we're doing, we're not going to snooker ourselves. So we're not going to go down an avenue where we've only got one pathway and it's hit or miss. If you can plan for those what if scenarios, then what you are is further down the line, you're more adaptable, you're more prepared, and you are ready. And I think one of the real interesting dynamics of this is when we build a team in this era. So in a modern workplace now, from a generational gap, we've got people that have never been further apart from each other as an upbringing. We've got we've gone beyond the millennials. We've got the iGen and the digital generation. That 3 minutes is a long time. Everything's instantaneous. They'll send 1,000 emails a day, but probably won't have 5 conversations. Whereas you've got people at the other end of the spectrum that need to talk, that need to feel that human interaction, that do things on a calculator, a piece of paper, whatever it may be. And then what you're expected to do is try and blend these people and get them to kind of sing at the same time, work to the same, and that's really difficult when fundamentally people are very, very different. And I go back to the point, my personal view is in the workplace right now, from those that are nearly ready to retire into those that are entering in the workplace, we've never had a bigger gap in terms of that whole experience, that upbringing. And I think what's really interesting is your star players, your man of the matches, they become different people at different times. And it's making sure that just because one person is your number one at one area, and unfortunately somebody else is probably not very effective at that moment in time, that dial will change. That at some point in some scenario, your 10 will become 1 and your 1 will become 10. that, and it's making sure that you're always aware of what that hierarchy and what that relationship looks like, and making sure you're always preparing your one to play your star role. And I think that's really important when you look at changing dynamics, changing situations, and understanding how that all fits together.
Yeah, no, really clear. And again, if I go back to you being a goalkeeper, I would predict that for the goalkeepers that I know, they are the ones who are actually much more negative thinkers naturally than positive, because you're really good at planning how you're going to keep stuff out. And so you are faced with the fact that I'm stopping a negative all the time. So and there's a lot of stuff on the performance room about the nonsense of positive thinking for the sake of it, but there's helpful thinking. I've had a thought, how do I build on it helpfully? So it doesn't matter whether it's a positive or a negative thought. What's the helpful next thought that comes with it? Because that's the thing that drives the action. But and I can see that in your answers around that helpful thinking to do with, here's the challenge of the sort of diversity of age within the working population. How do we deal with that? What's the solutions? What's the helpful way of thinking about that? And so I can kind of see how you embrace that problem-solving thinking rather than the often overly optimistic, positive for the sake of it, denial of anything other than brilliant thinking, which stops a lot of people. So I think that's really, really fascinating. Time is flying, Liam. So I'm just curious, have you got any last thoughts or any last reflections based upon the sort of the leadership journey, the if I knew then what I know now?
I think I know it's almost taboo now to use this, but the term authentic leadership, I think that's critical, and you shouldn't have to use the term authentic to be an authentic leader. If you have to write that above your door, then you're doing something wrong. And I think the one thing that I've learned from, and I've been lucky enough that I've grown in confidence and I've been fortunate enough to be really relatively successful in the challenge that I've faced. But being authentic, being true to yourself, being true to the people that you're leading is a far better quality than, like I said, repeating myself, but being bulletproof or having all the knowledge. I won't embarrass them by naming them, but there's somebody I worked under and alongside for a number of years who regularly used to say to me, "I'm just a thick ex-rugby league player." Well, he really wasn't, because what he was just he was a Pied Piper. People followed him, and watching that person's leadership skills and how they went about things was very different to mine. There wasn't a right or a wrong, but the thing that was really powerful was just the genuine nature of that and the sincere nature of how that was approached. And I took a lot of learning from that. That person was not scared to say, to sit in a meeting with some very intelligent people and say, "I don't know what you're on about. I don't understand." And I think that's got more power. And is a bigger lesson and something that I'll always take forward, rather than trying to be something I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really big theme coming through all of the interviews about just the lessons that have been learned that have ended up with people's increased confidence to be themselves and understanding the value that they bring when they are themselves, but also still having the desire to kind of, what's the next step and how do I build on that? And that am I confident that by being myself today, I'm going to add value? And and that's coming through loud and clear as well. And I think that gives you a position to kind of deal with good, bad, and indifferent from as well. I'm still going to be able to be myself, whether I'm responding to something I'm delighted with or mildly devastated by, and anywhere in between. So it's really, really clear, really powerful. So thanks for the honesty and the openness. That's some really great stuff in there, and lots of stuff for us to get snippets out of, and kind of keep sharing the learning as we go forward. So I guess at end of the leg, so we need kind of baton handover. So I'm curious to find out who you're handing over to, Liam. Who are we going to be talking to next week when I've actually had a haircut, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, no, I got fortunate that my missus braved a haircut with the Clippers early doors. It's just grown back now. So yeah, no, I'm passing the baton on to someone who I think has shown immense bravery. He's a guy called Nathan Atkinson. He is the founder and the trustee of a charity called Fuel for School. And Nathan's very quick story was that he was a very, very successful head teacher. quite unconventional. When I first met him, he had he's not flash, but he had a Breitling watch that I was obsessed with, a nice tattoo going down his arm, was very smartly dressed, but, he was leading schools in very difficult environments, and he built up a reputation of being an excellent head teacher. And then halfway through his career, he just decided that he'd done that, he'd had enough, he's going to plough his own furrow, and he'd found something that he was very, very passionate about, which is where he developed the charity called Fuel for School. And ultimately what it does is it feeds a number of children, young people. It works to the United Nations Sustainable Goals, and it's just an outstanding piece. And I think my admiration for Nathan is the fact that he got to the top of the tree in his industry and had done it all, could have probably had any job, could have gone on to very, very many different things, but he chose to start again, reset, and go with something that he was very, very, he felt was vocational and meant a lot to him. So I'm really looking forward. I've learned a lot from Nathan, and I'm really looking forward to hearing and seeing Nathan next week with you, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. That sounds like a brilliant handover. Yeah, but in terms of sort of doing good and paying stuff forward, but also, as you say, that kind of obvious learning points and kind of the bravery to change and desire. That'll be fascinating. So thank you. Fantastic handover. I'll be looking forward to that, and I'll be extra sharp for it as well. So that's good. All good. Well, look, brilliant. Really great to hear from you. Thank you for taking your time over Friday lunchtime to talk to us. We'll be making sure you can get access to all of this yourself as well, Liam, to kind of pass it on to anyone else who you think is going to benefit and kind of keep the development going within the organisation. All the best for sort of planning for next season as well, and sort of for the brave new world of football in the I was going to say post-COVID, but we're certainly not post-COVID yet. It's in the continuing COVID scenario. Really, all the best with that as well. Thanks for your generosity today. Look forward to some continued conversations in the future, and thanks for everyone who's watched live and who watches when we make the recordings available. And have a safe weekend, and we'll see you for leg 9 next week. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Chris.
Take care. Bye-bye.